Welcome, everybody, to today's press conference. Over the course of the last year, America has come face to face with two realities about our early education system that have long been ignored. Childcare is essential to our economy, and that this vital system is at its breaking point. Childcare has always been thought of as a private matter for families instead of rightly recognized as a public good. The truth is, childcare plays an essential role for families, for businesses, and for the development of our future workforce. And the lack of public investment has created three interconnected problems: high costs for parents, high costs for providers, low wages for workers. Even before the COVID-19, providers operated on the thinnest of margins. Then the pandemic hit, shaking this fragile system to the point of collapse. 40% of providers closed, and the effects on parents, especially women in the workforce, are devastating. Over 2 million women pushed out of work, including 1 million moms. We cannot let this system fall through the cracks and abandon women and kids in the process. That's why I'm so proud that the American Rescue Plan included a transformative $40 billion for the childcare industry, resources that I have been fighting for since the spring last year. Now we must take proactive steps to ensure the underinvestment that got us here is not repeated. Today, I am introducing the Child Care is Infrastructure Act, my bill to fortify this vital sector of our economy with critical funding to support providers and, in turn, parents and kids. The Child Care is Essential Infrastructure Act will provide $10 billion to child care providers to help renovate facilities, which is especially important in the wake of COVID-19. It will assess immediate and overall infrastructure improvements needed to keep students safe and staff, create a new loan repayment program to support early childhood educators, and increase the support for campus-based childcare options for student parents. This bill will stabilize the childcare providers, improve the safety of our childcare centers, and support the financial well-being of our essential early educator workforce. With this legislation, we are acknowledging a fundamental truth. Childcare is infrastructure. Just like roads and bridges and public transportation, childcare is a part of the bedrock of our economy. The economic benefits of childcare are well documented, but so are the economic losses associated with its inaccessibility and our nation's repeated refusal to invest in childcare with the significance that it deserves. According to the Early Learning Policy Group, the childcare industry contributes over $99 billion annually to the economy. But the Council for Strong America also estimates that American businesses lose over $12 billion annually due to their employees' challenges finding affordable quality care. Employers are dependent on childcare for the stability and productivity of their employees, and during the pandemic, we learned this the hard way. It's also about valuing the essential providers and educators who support our families and the economy. 96% of childcare professionals are women, 40% of which are women of color. These women shape the minds of the future and set our children down a path towards lifelong success, but they are often paid minimum wage salaries. By investing in their education, we're supporting their success as professionals and enhancing the quality of care for our kids. Our kids are our future, and it's been proven time and again that access to high quality early education is the crucial start every child needs and deserves for their long-term success in life. With that, I've invited childcare experts and providers to join me today to announce this bill. And I want to thank the many organizations and early educators who have helped shape this bill and brought childcare to the forefront of our national dialogue, including the Bipartisan Policy Center and Jumpstart. This bill was made possible because of your steadfast advocacy. I'm eager to hear from our speakers this morning and the reasons they're supporting the Child Care is Infrastructure Act. Our first speaker is Nicole Barcliff, who is Policy Director at the Local Initiative Support Corporation and a co-chair of the National Children's Facilities Network. With 2 decades of public policy experience, she advocates for federal policies that forge resilient and inclusive communities of opportunity across America. Great places to live, work, visit, do business, and raise families. Nicole has worked closely with LISC, national programs, local offices, and broad cross-sector of organizations to develop and implement policy advocacy agendas that drive access to equitable opportunity in local communities. Her priority policy areas include safety and justice, health and childcare, and early learning. Nicole began her career as a federal legislative staffer. We are so grateful to our staffers, and is a graduate of Temple University. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Congresswoman Clark, for your strong leadership on child care issues and for giving LISC and the National Children's Facilities Network the opportunity to voice our strong support for the Child Cares Infrastructure Act. We happily, heartily endorse this legislation and are ecstatic about its focus on facilities and related technical assistance for providers. The legislation for us is important because it takes the long desired and necessary step of providing dedicated public sector funding, dedicated federal funding to address childcare and early education infrastructure needs. Now, some people may be wondering why entities like LISC and other community development organizations are really interested in this work. It's really simple. We know that the availability of high quality childcare programs in local communities are important to the success of the people who live there. They're important to the success of our neighbors and the support important to the success of families. We also know that facilities, indoor and outdoor spaces, are very important to the quality and health and safety of providers. You mentioned that childcare programs are an essential support for working families and directly influence child development. They are, and the physical environments play an important role in supporting the health and safety of children and providers, the quality of programs, and early childhood development. A facility can either enhance program quality and safety for children and teachers or undermine it. And quite honestly, we all have to get past this notion that people in low income, urban and rural communities, which this bill does tremendous things to help, deserve anything less than high quality spaces and high quality programs. The last thing that I'll say is that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated existing childcare inadequacies and created a new sense of urgency to address the condition of physical spaces where childcare and early learning take place. We know that a part of the reason why providers have not been able to access support is not because they do not want to. It has had to do with the fragile operating subsidies that they receive, which we're very pleased to see an increased federal focus on stabilizing the sector. But we also know that it's an equity issue. The majority of childcare businesses are women-owned, and BIPOC businesses account for the majority of the industry. Childcare providers have long been denied equitable access to capital and financial products to address their needs, and they face barriers to accessing capital to improve the quality of the spaces that they provide. So with this new significant federal investment, states have a chance to rebuild their childcare systems in a way that supports equitable access to quality programs in appropriate spaces. We want to seize this great policy and momentum and address the lack of access to quality childcare and the health and safety challenges posed by inadequate facilities. So once again, we are very pleased to endorse this legislation. We're pleased about the leadership on this issue, and we're really pleased that providers and their needs, particularly their financial needs, are being highlighted in this piece of legislation. We look forward to working with you to push it across the finish line.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicole. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Melissa Boteach, VP for Income Security and Child Care Early Learning at the National Women's Law Center. Melissa oversees NWLC's advocacy, policy, and public education strategies to ensure that all women and families have the income and supports they need to thrive. Prior to joining NWLC, Melissa spent nearly a decade at the Center for American Progress and at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Melissa has a Master's of Public Policy from GW and a Master's of Equality Studies from the University College Dublin, where she studied women in social movements, and bachelor's degrees from the University of Maryland in government and Spanish. Thank you so much for joining us, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Representative Clark, for your steadfast leadership on ensuring that all families have access to affordable and high quality childcare. NWLC is proud to support the Child Cares Infrastructure Act, which would take us closer to that goal. The bill would authorize urgently needed investments to renovate childcare facilities and support education and training for the early education workforce. And this legislation couldn't be timelier. The American Rescue Plan is a massive victory for women, especially women of color, who have been the most impacted by the pandemic. The bill answered our call for at least $50 billion in dedicated relief funding for childcare, which is the largest federal investment in childcare since World War II. But the work doesn't end here. In order to rebuild, we have to address the underlying inequities that made us so vulnerable to the pandemic in the first place. The relief package was about getting us back to the pre-pandemic starting point, which had its flaws. But now we are charged with building a childcare system that meets families' needs and provides early educators with the facilities and quality jobs that recognize how essential childcare workers are. Childcare is infrastructure. It is the work that makes all other work possible. And I'm pleased to talk to you today briefly about the childcare crisis our nation faces and what we can do to build towards the future of childcare and the role that the Child Cares Infrastructure Act would play to put us on that path. Some background on the childcare crisis. 1 in 6 childcare jobs has been lost since the start of the pandemic, meaning that nearly half of the 350,000 childcare jobs lost at the onset of the pandemic have not yet returned. These losses disproportionately impact women of color as both early educators and as mothers pushed out of the labor force due to unpaid caregiving responsibilities. Consider that 1 year ago, in February 2020, we celebrated women comprising half the workforce. Fast forward to today, and women's labor force participation has not been this low since 1988. Businesses are seeing the loss of employees firsthand. According to a December study by the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, approximately 32% of employers said they'd already seen employees leave since the pandemic, with half citing childcare as the reason. COVID has laid bare and exacerbated the challenges in our childcare system. But as Representative Clark noted, even before the pandemic, America faced a quiet childcare crisis. Families were struggling to afford costs if they could find childcare at all, with fewer than 1 in 7 eligible children being served by federal childcare programs, and families, particularly in rural areas, struggling with a lack of care options. Research from Center for American Progress showed that over half of Americans live in a childcare desert or a neighborhood with an insufficient supply of licensed childcare. On the other hand, early educators were being paid poverty wages for caring for and educating our children. Childcare remains one of the lowest paid professions in the United States, with recent data showing that over half of childcare workers are enrolled in at least one public assistance or support program. So the long and short of it is that our patchwork and underfunded childcare and early learning system is and was premised upon low pay for providers and unaffordable fees for families, with the most severe impact shouldered by the women of color that are already navigating compounding racial and gender discrimination in the labor market. In order to move forward, we have to recognize that this is an issue both for families and the economy writ large. A study by the Century Foundation and Center for American Progress found that without congressional action, the risk of mothers leaving the labor force or reducing work hours to assume caretaking responsibilities could amount to more than $64.5 billion a year in lost wages and economic activity, and an additional loss of $12.2 billion in tax revenue. The good news is that we know how to fix this. We know if we conceive of childcare as a public good, of childcare as infrastructure, that we can rebuild back in a way that centers the people who have been most directly affected and that builds a sustainable system long-term. When I say childcare as infrastructure, I don't just mean the facilities. I mean the people who do the work, the degree to which it's affordable for parents and the choices they have for care that meets their needs. I mean the quality of the early educator jobs, which are essential to helping us build the supply that we need long-term. Infrastructure holds up our economy. It bridges workers and jobs. And like physical infrastructure, childcare does those things. It's a public good, and with investments such as those in the Child Cares Infrastructure Act, we will have immediate and long-term positive impacts on families and our economy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Melissa, and our thanks to both you personally and to the National Women's Law Center for your partnership. You have made this legislation possible. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Ritling, the Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund. As Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund, Sarah is acutely focused on the needs of children living in poverty who would benefit the most from access to high-quality early childhood educational opportunities. Prior to joining FFYF, Sarah served as Senior Policy Advisor at the Education Council, counsel to Senator Lamar Alexander, and for the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Sarah holds a Bachelor of Arts from Syracuse University and also earned her JD from Syracuse University's College of Law. Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm just thrilled to be here. And on behalf of FFYF, I want to thank you, Congresswoman Clark, for your persistent leadership and commitment to improving opportunities and outcomes for kids and families, and for being a true champion of childcare and early learning on Capitol Hill, especially this past year throughout the pandemic. We know that access to high quality childcare is an essential pillar of America's economy, allowing millions of parents to go to work or attend school each day while their children are in a safe, nurturing environments that support their healthy development. There is no lack of data that shows us just how important childcare and early education is for the development of young children and for our local economies. Access to care has shown to improve labor productivity and economic well-being for parents who can rely on a safe environment for their children, resulting in increased work hours, fewer missed work days, and pursuit of additional educational opportunities. And research shows that mothers earn an additional $79,000 in lifetime earnings when they have access to care that allows them to work. Ensuring families have access has long-term impacts on our youngest learners and lays the groundwork for a child's cognitive, socio-emotional development as they enter school, and has proven increased graduation rates by 14% and contribute to the academic and professional successes later in life. In order to take advantage of these benefits of childcare and early education, Congress must continue to prioritize thoughtful, innovative solutions such as the Child Cares Infrastructure Act, which would lift up and support struggling providers, help address the core issues within the child care crisis: access, affordability, and quality. Investing in safe, healthy childcare facilities, especially in childcare deserts and communities impacted by closures during the pandemic, will ensure families have better access to care, allowing parents to return to work or school to improve their economic circumstances. It is a smart investment that will yield positive returns when more parents can return to work. Additionally, recruiting, training, retaining a highly skilled childcare workforce will ensure that there is no shortage of childcare providers, which we are seeing as a result of the pandemic, and will improve the education and care of our youngest learners. These policies have bipartisan support. This is not an issue for just, it should be an issue for every single member of Congress. According to our recent polling, 74% of voters want their elected leaders to prioritize childcare and early learning this year. And across this political spectrum, voters overwhelmingly understand the importance of care as an essential infrastructure investment, which is critical as we enter this conversation, with 80% saying they support federal funding for facilities. Again, we're so grateful to your commitment to your championship of this issue. And we look forward to working with you and everyone here on screen and off screen, day in and day out to get this across the finish line. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your focus on our youngest learners and making sure that we are meeting their needs. And finally, last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Justin Pasquariello, Executive Director of the East Boston Social Center, which is a multi-service agency serving culturally diverse families and individuals of all ages throughout Greater Boston, including communities I represent in the Massachusetts 5th District. Before his current position, Justin was the Executive Director of Children's Health Watch, a data collection, research, and policy center with the mission to improve the health and development of young children. Justin serves on the advisory board at the Harvard Kennedy School's Taubman Center for State and Local Government and received his BA, MBA, and MPA from Harvard University. Justin, thank you for joining us here today and for your support of this bill.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Clark, for your leadership in recognizing and highlighting the importance of this critical infrastructure. We've seen the need firsthand at East Boston Social Centers. As you highlighted, we serve people across the lifespan in the diverse communities of East Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop, some of the places that have been very hardest hit by COVID-19 and related economic impacts. We serve approximately 150 children in early education and 150 in school-age programs, and about 90% of those who we partner with receive subsidy or voucher based on family income, involvement with Department of Children and Families, or other needs. When I joined the organization about 4 years ago now, we had 3 public housing locations where we served half of all the children in our early education and school-age programs. We had to move out of all 3 of them at approximately the same time because of public housing revitalizations. And to do this, I needed significant expert support. As I started on this journey, I knew very little about real estate and the issues related to building out facilities. We ultimately had to find and update a space, repurpose rooms in another, and find and completely build out a third while serving children and families without disruption and staying financially stable. And it ended up that a lot of this had to happen during this pandemic. So we're very grateful to you, Congresswoman Clark, and to your team for recognizing this need and strategizing with us on approaches and sources of support. We've also been very fortunate here in the Commonwealth to have an intermediary, the Children's Investment Fund, that provides technical assistance and early stage financing. The legislation being introduced today recognizes the critical importance of these expert intermediaries who fill these gaps in knowledge that we often don't have as providers. To meet these needs, we also had to fundraise from multiple sources, and we still have to match some from our reserves. But we've been very fortunate in the Commonwealth to have the Early Education and Out of School Time Grant Program that awarded us a $1 million grant to support a large portion of the most intensive build-out. It not only preserves 33 infant and toddler seats, but also is expanding our capacity by an additional 8 seats to meet the needs in our communities. The condition and quality of facilities have a huge impact on the health, safety, and development of children who spend hours each day in our programs. These funds are enabling us to build the high-quality facilities that our children, families, and educators deserve. This state funding source for childcare facility improvements is unique in the nation, but the need remains greater than even what Massachusetts can do. Many more programs need support. In this time of crisis, we're all recognizing how essential early education and care are. At the same time, with changes in the nature of work, there will likely be vacant retail and office spaces that can be revitalized as early education and care centers. To build back better requires not only investing to maintain current supply, but also to build the supply to meet the true need and unleash the full potential of our workforce and our youngest learners. This legislation also does more to unleash that full potential. Given low current pay scales that have been highlighted today, many educators can't afford the out-of-pocket expenses to sustain the debt from further education. We're grateful that this legislation includes debt forgiveness that will enable our teachers to build their skills and stay in this field. Congresswoman Clark, You're known for your deep understanding of the needs of the early education and care field. You've worked closely with us to understand the infrastructure needs we face. I am so grateful for you taking that time with us at East Boston Social Centers, and I'm thrilled that you are introducing this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. We are so proud of our partnership with you and the difference that you make in our communities every single day. With that, I will turn it over to Catherine Alexander.
Thank you so much. Members of the media, we'd ask you to raise your hand if you have a question at this time or put it in the chat box. We will be taking questions for the Congresswoman as well as our guest speakers. And here we've got our first question from Ella Nielsen from Vox Media.
Hi, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for holding this call today, and thank you all for joining. I was wondering if you have talked to the Biden administration or congressional leaders about where childcare infrastructure fits into President Biden's Build Back Better plan. And I know, we haven't sort of seen details of that yet, but sort of where this fits into kind of this larger potential infrastructure bill coming down the pike. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ella, for that question. And I can tell you that one of the most exciting aspects of doing this work, meeting this critical need for childcare infrastructure at this point, is that the Biden administration understands this and has made a care agenda, in particular childcare, one of their top priorities. And we know that this administration is not only going to meet the needs of families who are in crisis right now due to the health effects of the pandemic and the devastating economic fallout, but meeting them long term. So this is our opportunity with a White House and a president that has made this a top commitment to follow through and build on the stabilizing funding that we were able to get in the American Rescue Plan and move towards permanent changes to benefit our youngest learners and their families and our economy as a whole. So they understand with us that there is no recovery without this, and that for our future economy, as we meet this moment of racial, economic, and climate justice, childcare is at the very center of it. Anyone else is welcome to add in too.
Great. With that, I don't believe we have any further media questions, but members of the press, I invite you to raise your hand and correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, here we go. 1 second. Great. This is Karen from WBZ TV.
Great, you should be able to hear me all right.
Yes, we
can hear you.
Oh, good, that smile means something. I wanted to ask about vaccine supply and the president's promise to at least get every American on the list to be vaccinated by May 1st. The governor's been very upset about vaccine supply. If I recall, Congresswoman, you called on the governor to change the way we register for vaccines in the state. Do you want to update your thoughts on how we're doing and how the federal government is reaching state demand? The governor's been pretty critical about deadlines being missed and not enough vaccine being available.
I think what we have seen is that promises made, promises delivered from the Biden administration about what they are doing to increase vaccine supply. And, what I am pleased about is that early educators were recognized as a critical group that needs to be vaccinated, along with our first responders and our public school teachers and you know, that they are also critical to our recovery. So we are going to continue working with the Biden administration to make sure that we are increasing the supply. The administration has called for eligibility for the vaccine to be open to the general public by May 1st. I anticipate we will see that here in Massachusetts. But the key is making sure that we can get vaccinations into arms, and that includes our childcare providers. We will not be able to reopen if we cannot guarantee the safety of childcare providers. So, Justin, I don't know if you or if any of the other panelists want to comment on the importance of vaccinations for this critical workforce.
It's critically important, and we are really grateful that those opportunities for vaccination are open. So our staff are already being vaccinated, and we're grateful to partners, including neighborhood villages and others who are helping us to remove any barriers that we have. I think others need this as well. So we're getting support for transportation for our staff, and we've also had partners at East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, Boston Medical Center, working to help educate people and discuss any myths related to vaccination so that our staff will be able to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and I think we are going to see we've already seen a marked difference in how this administration is approaching vaccinations. We will continue to build on that work. And I'm very confident that as the president set forth that by 4th of July, we will hopefully have a return to normalcy. And critical to that is supporting childcare as a public good. If we want to get back to life as we knew it, but not just back to the status quo, but an even more inclusive economy, this bill is going to be crucial to getting there.
We now have a question from Michelle from NBC. Michelle, take it away. We cannot hear you, Michelle. Should be unmuted. All right, well, I will read her question, which she has sent to us. Can you lay out the numbers comparing the investment and the return on investment? Is it a $10 billion investment? At what point does the bill pay for itself in terms of boosting the economy?
Oh, thank you, Michelle. That is a great question. And there are so many really hard things about childcare, but one thing that is easy is that the investment has such a high rate of return. The estimates are from a low of we get $7 back for every dollar invested to a high of $14 or $15 back. So wherever you want to choose on that scale, this investment in our children is one that we know through reams and reams of data and research is one that is not only critical to supporting families and our economy, but is one that is just one of the best investments we can make of public dollars with the return rate that it has. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah.
Oh, Nicole, you go ahead. I'll go after you.
Oh, great. Thank you. You know, one of the things that we talk about in terms of our work in this space is there's the return on investment, but then there's just the dire need for front end health and safety fixes, right? And so there are going to be returns on this in terms of improving the health and safety and the condition of children and providers. Prior to the pandemic, a 2015 investigation conducted by the Health and Human Services Department Inspector General found 96% of childcare inspected during unannounced visits had one or more potentially hazardous conditions and non-compliance with health and safety requirements. And those non-compliance issues weren't because providers didn't care or providers didn't want to improve the condition of facilities. It was literally a financial barrier to addressing direct health and safety concerns. And additionally, there are a couple of states that are, tackling this and have conducted comprehensive national needs assessments, and their findings have been disturbing. We're talking about poor ventilation systems, absence of classroom sinks, no indoor gross motor skills space and equipment, playground safety hazards, and asbestos. These are things that even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic pose serious health and safety concerns for providers, children, and families, but also contributed to health costs, right? You have kids in communities that are asthmatic. You have providers with multiple health conditions. So we believe that this direct investment not only contributes to that quality return on investment that is attached to access to quality programming, but also to basic health and safety concerns. And this is why we're very much excited about this bill.
And I just want to add, in terms of framing this up as a question of it's the cost of childcare right now and who is bearing it. So it's not as though childcare doesn't cost things, or cost money. It's that right now those costs are being borne by parents who can't afford it and by providers who are making poverty wages. And if we are conceptualizing childcare as a public good, similar to infrastructure where we can't individually build a road or a bridge, but we recognize that it is in the public good to have roads and bridges. And so for all of us, and so we pay into that. Similarly for childcare, we have made it such an individual burden and made it so difficult for both parents and providers to function in this patchwork system. But in reality, it's a public good that helps all of us, and it's part of our critical educational infrastructure as well. And so I would note that earlier I said that the cost of women being pushed out of the labor force of the economy is about $64.5 billion, according to those estimates by the Center for American Progress and the Century Foundation. And so I think in addition to thinking about it in terms of the costs of action, I like to think of it in terms of the cost of inaction.
Great. And our next question is from Matt Murphy from State House News. Matt, you can unmute.
Thanks, Catherine, and thank you, Congresswoman, for doing this call. I wanted to talk to you about vaccinations and education in Massachusetts. The president had called for states to make vaccines available to teachers beginning in March, and Governor Baker complied with that beginning last week, but he is continuing to push forward with a plan to bring all elementary students back to classrooms for in-person full-time learning by April 5th. And without increased supply, the demand among educators is outpacing the state's ability to put shots in arms. So I'm wondering if you think vaccinations should be a requirement for a full-time return to the classroom.
Thank you so much, Matt. And, part of what we are trying to do on the federal level in working with the state is in passing the American Rescue Plan, allow them to increase the supply of vaccinations, but also the funding to reopen our schools safely, whether that is for HVAC systems, partitions, PPE, and an ongoing testing program that is robust for our schools. And so, we believe that teachers and childcare providers should be part of the essential workforce that receives vaccinations, because they are essential to getting our economy reopened. There have been problems with the rollout. As you know, I have called for a central registration system from the beginning. And there were decisions made to take this, to sort of scrap the plans that had been in place for years about local administration and bring it to more mass distribution sites that were privately administered. So the state legislature and their oversight committees are looking into all of that. And what we are pressing for is that all of us want childcare reopened. All of us want schools reopened. Let's use this federal funding. Let's use an administration that is committed to this, to getting this done and done safely for families, for teachers, and childcare providers.
Great. And for a final question, this is on the bipartisan nature of childcare. How can we convince Republicans that school infrastructure such as childcare facilities and school facilities are as important as roads and bridges?
Well, I think one of our best indications that we have bipartisan support is the $40 billion that just was signed by the president with, not a single vote, but also without opposition from Republicans in the Senate, in the House. We can have another conversation about the lack of support from Republicans for the rescue plan and meeting this moment for Americans. But it is important that this, in every single congressional district in this country, there are parents of young children who need childcare, and there are childcare providers who need to be able to perform this critical work and be paid a living wage to do so. So this is the nature of this. This is not a partisan issue. This is fundamental as any road or bridge to our recovery, to an investment in infrastructure. And that is why it has the support overwhelmingly from the business community who understands this connection. And so with this bill, I am hoping to build on that stabilization funding and the changing paradigm of childcare, that we will now finally acknowledge that it is an essential public good and fund it as such. We know the margins for childcare providers were very thin in the best of times, and this is not the best of times. But let's not return to the status quo. Let's make the investments that are necessary to support our children, to support addressing poverty in children, to support families and working women, and the providers who are providing this crucial early education. All of this has a big step forward with this Child Care is Infrastructure Act. And I am so grateful to everyone on this call and to everybody who's partnered in making it a bill that has such broad support and will help us build the bipartisan support that we need to fund childcare at the levels that are required going forward.